Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue dans The Prep Dad Podcast. Je m'appelle Louis et j'ai un master en sciences et je serai votre hôte. Pour rappel, ce podcast a pour but de traiter de nombreux sujets autour de la santé, de la nutrition, de la musculation et aujourd'hui on va parler de biomécanique. Encore une fois, ce podcast c'est le reflet de nos pensées bien plus que des vérités générales et on ne vous impose en aucun cas notre vision des choses mais on vous invite à réfléchir autour de certains sujets. Et aujourd'hui, podcast très particulier car le podcast sera uniquement en anglais, car je suis avec deux intervenants qui ne viennent pas du coup de France. Donc je vous invite, si ce n'est pas le cas, à aller sur YouTube et à mettre les sous-titres car j'ai tout sous-titré en français, donc c'est sous-titré, vérifié. Allez tout voir et si vous comprenez l'anglais, vous pouvez évidemment l'écouter sur Spotify. So basically, I just introduced the podcast and I'm with Benny Price and Dr. Mark Slavin. And could you please both introduce yourself? I don't know. We want to start first.
Go ahead. The man who started first.
Introduce myself?
What you doing?
Dr. Mark Slavin. For the last 34 years, I've had the privilege and honor of representing an organization called RTS, which started in 1997 by a gentleman named Tom Purvis, which we had met previously in 1990 when we helped to start NASM, which was the first personal training course ever offered anywhere in the world, to the best of my knowledge. And if I'm wrong about that, I apologize. But from 90 to 97, we were doing the NASM, but it was really centered around his concept, which at that time he called biomechanics, later on changed it to what we now know as exercise mechanics. And from 97 on, we both left, and I've been sort of his global representative since that time.
Thank you. And Benny?
So I am a mechanical engineer turned personal trainer, and I was operating out of Asia, particularly Malaysia at the time when I met Dr. Slavin, who was teaching an RTS course that I attended 5 years ago, and which is kind of crazy, right? It's been 5 years. But yeah, then from that course, because of my background, I picked things up and understood things very quickly. The dots had never connected for me before, and I'd been quite disillusioned with personal training as a profession. And it was at that point that he helped kind of make everything make sense for me. And as a result, asked me to start training to become an instructor. And these days, we're partners in operating the global division of RTS outside of the UK, the US, Canada, and Brazil.
And so, actually, a lot of people in France know about other courses online, but a lot of people don't know about RTS. And I came around RTS, I would say a year ago, when I was looking at Paul Stendel's content, and you probably know him from the UK.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of smart. I'm going to start looking into it. And then I had the privilege to go to Dubai, see you, go to Singapore, see you for the seminar. And I was like, some of that stuff is taught, but in other ways. And it kind of like originates from RTS. So could you tell like people what RTS is all about? Like if you want to explain that.
You do a better job than I do of this.
Yeah, probably because I have to write the website content and stuff all the time. Right? So I'm used to trying to compress it into a small amount. It's biomechanics, but applied to the gym, and provided with some thought processes and structures for using that information and helping people progress over the course of either a set or a session or a program or their lifetime. The part of the issue that we often see with biomechanics and the way that it's studied is it's doing things that we don't do in the gym, right? It's like slam dunking a basketball, which is fairly irrelevant to 40-year-old Doris who works upstairs and is a lawyer and hasn't done any workouts for the past 10 years. And then it's also athletic applications, so it's applied to people that are super capable and are just trying to jump 10% higher, as opposed to go from nothing to even relatively capable and then to much stronger. So we really try and tie in the physics element and understanding the external resistance stuff because that's why we operate in a gym, right? Those tools are just means of applying resistance to someone, force to someone.
The way it's well said, but in the way I look at it, an exercise is divided into two parts. You do it, you get the benefits from it. The stimulation, the adaptation. The adaptations, which is seemingly what most exercise science studies, hypertrophy, reps, sets, time, all this stuff. And there's so much debatable information, not misinformation, just information that seems to contradict itself or be all over the place. This part of it, the actual doing it, the stimulation, is physics. And I know that scares people, but it's fun. Physics you can't argue with. It's the one part of an exercise that's a guaranteed. You can't argue with it. You can argue its interpretation. And so I kind of like that aspect of it because you can't disagree with it as much as you want to, as much as people have tried to. And now it's become a really popular thing.
Okay, thank you. And also what's important to mention is that RTS is not only like online education, because you got to do the online course and the in-person course. And that's what's interesting, because you can learn like much more from applying into the gym floor.
We had this thing, I've been in the industry obviously for quite a bit, and before the internet, if anyone could even remember that, before cell phones. And as technology evolved and as courses began to go online and make it easier for trainers, and I certainly don't want to criticize NASM, but one of the reasons we left is they were trying to condense it and we were trying to expand it. But the one part about NASM at that time in the 90s and now RTS is that it will never give up its practical component, because that's where you learn. I don't know how you could learn to swim if you don't get in the water. And so we probably would be a much more successful business if we strictly went online, but we won't, because that we want trainers in the gym applying this.
And that's probably why I just discovered 1 year ago. I've done all of these courses and people know, and then I was like, oh, they're not that popular online. You don't have that much following, but your content is like teaching people not what to do and not like a certain exercise, but like how to think about exercise. And I value that. And that's why the first topic for today is rethinking about exercise. We're going to talk about stuff we talk about in France. And I explained that to you a bit before you. We're going to explain that a bit later. And first and foremost, it's not about attacking people. It's just about rethinking about ideas we have, right?
The one thing you said that was interesting, I'll just say this, and it's not about attacking people, but when you say you've come across a lot of content online relative to this, but you hadn't heard of us, that is our content.
Yeah.
That is our content.
Yeah, I agree, actually.
Yes, that's why he's even referenced one of our students discussing it.
Right.
And there's plenty of... And what seems to vary quite a lot is sometimes people actually cite where it came from, and then sometimes,
a lot of time they don't.
And most of the time people don't.
Because all these big courses I've done, they never mention RTS. I know one of these big guys named Ben Yanis. I don't really follow him, but I know he mentioned quite a few times Tom Purvis. I know some people talk about Tom Purvis, but not a lot. And these courses, and I know the people that created these courses, they've done the RTS.
Mm-hmm. And the argument that I've been given to that point is that, Tom didn't create biomechanics, and that's right. It was invented in the 1600s, and I'm pretty sure Tom wasn't around then. And this analogy that I have in my head, I don't even know if I've ever told you this, but sorry to date myself, the Beatles didn't invent the words in the song, and they didn't invent the chords to the music, but they put it together in a way no one else had ever done before, and that's exactly what Tom did, and specifically trademarked or labeled it exercise mechanics.
And so what's the difference between biomechanics and exercise mechanics? Because you've touched on that at the beginning of the podcast. What would be the difference according to you?
It's, as Benny said, it's taking mechanics, biomechanics, which could be a beetle crawling or a bird flying or how you digest food, the biomechanics of digestion, but taking the physics component of the mechanics portion and applying it specifically to the concept of exercise, all forms, from cardio to yoga to Pilates to resistance training to whatever you can think of.
The problem you've got with understanding it relative to the gym is a lot of the tools we use in the gym have mechanics to them, which is going to dictate the way that they apply force and how that affects our structure, how that is going to provide stimulus to muscles and how that might put stress and tax on joints, and the manipulation of that, and the fact that sitting on one machine one way and using it in a certain way does not yield exactly the same stimulus as doing so another way. So if we're going to understand what we're doing in the gym, we need to understand the mechanics of both sides of the equation. Tom often refers to exercise as being this tug of war. And if you don't understand both sides, it's very difficult to understand what's actually taking place.
So the first topic is about static assessment, and I had to explain a bit of that to you because so people in France know that some of the trainers we have, they do analyze people based on pictures, and some of them can or cannot, can tell from the structure of the person what they can do or they cannot do. And so before touching onto that, what do you think of that posture thing? Is there a good or bad posture?
That's a great topic. That's going to be a tough answer in the sense that we don't ever compare somebody to somebody else. In other words, when you come to me, your posture is what you have. To label it good or bad means I'm putting it somewhere against a comparison of other people. And what's really interesting about this is that the original studies that sort of gave us this concept of what we all envision. If you took 1,000 trainers and said, what is good posture? They'd probably all describe a natural kyphosis, lordosis type thing. But that was based on an assessment of 2,000 people, and they took like this, okay, we'll take all these 2,000 people that had all these postures all over the place, but then they went down and said, well, we'll just take the good ones. Not knowing that just because somebody's posture didn't fit into someone's vision of it, doesn't mean necessarily it's good or bad. It's what you have to work with.
And so, because what's interesting into the seminars is that we learn, okay, what someone has or doesn't, and can you tell something from pics only? If you see someone, you see a picture of someone, I see a picture of you standing, doing whatever position, can I tell something out of that to apply to the gym floor?
If you saw a picture of me, you'd probably assume that I couldn't dunk a basketball.
And you'd be right.
And you'd be right. Really, that's offensive, but you would be right. Could you elaborate on that? Because that's confusing.
What are you assuming that people can do off the back of that information?
First of all, what pictures are we referring to? We're referring to.
There is. So now we can get into that. So there is I explained to you that word morpho-anatomy stuff. And first and foremost, have you ever heard of that word in English for the past 30 years? Morpho-anatomy, it would be the mix between morphology and anatomy in the same word.
I want to say maybe, but I can't dig it up, but it was maybe a long time ago.
I thought you were going to say it's, when people say, oh, you're an endomorph or an ectomorph, yeah. I thought it was going to be the anatomy of people with those different body shapes.
No, but I do think maybe some people that do believe in that, but I don't think so.
Where did the term come from?
To be honest with you, I am not sure, so I prefer not to say because I am not sure. But it became quite popular for the past, I would say, 2 decades.
2 decades, okay.
Or at least 1 decade, and and when you look at that up in French, you find some things, and they talk about limbs length, they talk about muscle, what we call muscle length, so the relationship between the size of your muscle belly and the tendon. And so based on this static assessment, they're like, okay, you've got a kind of big tendon compared to your muscle belly, so you cannot do certain exercise. And I'm just going to show a pic for the people. I think I'll put it on the screen. Mm-hmm. But basically, on the left, you would have what they call a short biceps court. So basically, you've got, short muscle belly compared to tendon on the elbow. And there you've got, a bigger muscle belly.
So based on what we're seeing here, what would be the prevailing thought on what I could or couldn't do?
So basically, I do think that they do think that tendons are weak. And so for example, some of them say, okay, you've got, short biceps, longer tendon. Don't go to that range of motion. Full extension on your, let's say, a preacher curl. Just based on that, not based on an exercise assessment.
Are they aware that tendons have to be just as strong as the muscles themselves in order to translate force from a muscle to a bone?
That's why I asked you. What do you think about that?
That's
And they, because I use the biceps, but they apply that to every single muscle.
Do they apply it to the calves?
I do think so. Yeah.
You shouldn't do end range plantar flexion if you have a longer aponeurosis in your gastrocs.
Okay, to be fair, okay.
Let's go. Get into it.
To be fair, this is the first time I'm hearing of this, and that doesn't mean good or bad.
Yeah.
That just means that's something. So I can tell you right now, the rest of my day is going to be on Google, looking at. So because I want to be fair, and I can't knock something that sort of is just passing. But if I'm certainly trusting you to represent some portion of what they're saying here, and I can't think of any trainer that has gone through a good quality education that would base their assessment off a picture, because that picture is a two-dimensional, still very thin sheet of paper, in no way represents what this client's capabilities are. Now, it's fair to say, in any client, good or bad, any client, short or long, didn't mean to say good or bad, that you still, what we say, we have this thing that you became familiar with, what you have to work with. So this is what the clients have, and we would like to know what their capabilities are from a joint position, and the joints include the tendons and how they operate. But I just can't see making a judgment like that until I've spent time with them.
And not even, let's say they don't say it's good or bad, can you make a judgment about, like, okay, what exercise they should or shouldn't do?
Can't see it.
Yeah. I was just thinking, because I've got different
contract your bicep? Maybe you've got a short bicep.
I do. No, on my right. Look, my right has got like a considerable difference than my left.
That's right.
Well, there we go. So one arm can do and one arm
exactly.
can't.
So I meant to do preacher curls with one arm and then not with the other. It's mental.
So that's interesting, actually.
There's also, I'm not sure, there's a property, and I always get them confused. I believe I have it now. Wolff's Law says if you put stress on muscles, they adapt. Davis's law says that soft tissue, meaning ligaments, tendons, discs, can also adapt over time with properly progressed forces. And so even if there was some element that I'm missing here, if there's some research that was at least in the ballpark of at least saying, we took 100 people with short biceps and they all ripped their tendons off when they did preacher curls, I say, okay, that's kind of interesting.
And I do think they also base their judgment on those crazy videos you see on the internet, and you often see, okay, people on the preacher curl tearing their biceps, and when you look at their biceps, there were those famous short biceps, so they're probably biased towards.
But how many videos are there of that?
Yes, that's the thing. You only have the extremes, and you don't have those videos of those people with the short biceps doing that without any issue.
It's just a wild thing to come up with any kind of conclusion on, because if you look at the internal leverage relative to the axis of the joint, you wouldn't see a dramatic difference between the two. If anything, you could see it the other way around. You could see someone who had a shorter biceps might have a higher peak, which would actually give them a better resultant force angle relative to the axis of the joint. If you saw someone with a longer one, it doesn't make any sense. But it's like saying that it's similar to the statement about someone having like weak lower abs or strong upper abs, when the reality is that to get force from one bone to another, you need an equal amount of force to be translated throughout all of the fibers, whether they're tendon fibers or muscle fibers in between. And as a result, at what point stuff stops becoming muscle and starts becoming tendon doesn't make any difference. You've just got something that doesn't produce contractions and is just a means of translating force from the muscle to the bone, and then you've got stuff that produces contractions. But either way, you've got force going from one bone to another, pulling them towards or letting them get further away from each other. And there's no reason from a mechanics perspective why you'd see different amounts of strengths or tension tolerance capabilities, maybe potentially, unless someone was progressing things at like a crazy rate and maybe using a means of doing so artificially, but it doesn't have a scientific backing to it, and I can't see. Well, you certainly haven't cited anything that they've said that would justify that.
And there's no question. I mean, there's no question. If we could pick something out of this, that the end range is going to be something that you would possibly progress to over time, but it's not based on a tendon thing. It's based on that person and progressing them through their ranges properly.
And to come back to these pictures, because we talked about that muscle, tendon, and some of these people are also able to say, okay, you've got a long femoral length compared to your tibial length, so you're more prone to do, let's say, like hack squat compared to like barbell back squat. But can you predict how the joints are going to move exactly? And maybe we can touch on fluoroscopy a bit later.
Well, now you're into an area that we could probably brace a little bit harder.
Yeah.
I believe Tom coined a phrase a long time ago, and it's now quite widely used, segmental proportions. And it applies to the fact that if he walks in day one and I'm thinking that in a multi-joint challenge someday or some point in his training, I'd like to think about putting a barbell on his back as a squat, which is popular. And it's a very advanced exercise, and it's not something we would do day one. But we could begin to assess his potential to, and one of the many factors would be proportions.
But that wouldn't be the only one.
No.
You couldn't be like, okay, you've got that femoral length compared to your tibial length, or you're not made to do that.
Well, at least you're bringing that up, because a lot of people initially judge and go, well, you're tall, you can't squat, you're short. So there are proportions play a big part in it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't
mean...
mean...
Because of the levers.
Yeah.
And the comparison is actually floor to knee and then knee to hip.
Yeah.
Which often gets missed as well, right? It's sometimes, depends on how these pictures are taken, but it's sometimes misleading as to where that point might be on someone.
Because of the soft tissue.
Yeah, because of soft tissue, because of clothing, because of all sorts. And then also what footwear they're wearing, right?
Yeah.
The footwear that they're wearing can change the distance from the floor to their knee.
And then you've got the whole torso, which people just look initially at the torso. And if you're checking somebody from day one, that's all you have to work with, because you're not loading them. But as soon as you put load on, then you have to factor how much load and where that load is, and that alters to some degree the effect of the torso relative to the femur. So there's so many complex factors. There's no way you could do this with a static picture.
And so, in order to know if someone has or doesn't have something, like you need to, I mean, they need to do a squat or to do some kind of exercise, and you got to see what they're doing.
If you could look at that picture, and also on like the side, maybe in like these statistics that came with a picture, it would tell you something about someone's center of mass.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then if there was also details there telling you exactly how much range they had in each of those joints, like you know when you're playing a video game or whatever, and it tells you the stats about. If it told you that, then you could maybe make some estimations.
Yeah, you could begin to.
But even then, constantly you see it. These are the kinds of things that get put together and estimated a lot of the time by people that just haven't worked with enough people.
And I think what they're looking for, correct me if I'm wrong, because this is a concept I'm starting to kind of really rethink, is they're looking to predict before they do anything. So he walks in and going, well, do you think he can squat? And I'm going to quote, I think probably the best line I've ever heard out of RTS and Tom, which is, I don't know, let's find out. And so you start going through a lot of movement things to find out, and you try and you constantly reassess and you edit and you keep moving. But I think people want to know, based on a picture, based on a simple movement assessment, can they do this? And it's just, I don't think it's the way to go.
The assessment stuff there's a few reasons why it seems to gain traction in the industry, right? Where people seem to want to be able to predict stuff. First of all, it allows you to look clever and confident, right? If you can go up to your client and make a prediction about them, then suddenly you get this buy-in because they go, oh my God, how did you know? And then the other thing that it allows you to do is be lazy, right? You can just build a coaching service and program built around people sending photos through and then just sending them cookie cutter programs off the back of it without having to actually do any work to learn anything about the person. But the problem you have is that the more time you spend actually working with people and making predictions, because like the first CPT that I did gave me templates to get people to do not just a photo assessment, but to do certain exercises, and then if they did certain things certain ways, then I would know the stuff that they needed to work on and the crazy stability exercises or foam rolling or stretching or all this kind of crap that I had to get them to do as a result of it. And you take that piece of paper when you first get it, this format, this template that you need to apply, and then you go and try it with 10 people, and it works for like 2 or 3 of them, and then for the other 7 it doesn't. And that was kind of the situation that I was in when I got to RTS, where I felt like I was back to just winging it, because I'd taken the science that I'd been given and tried it, and it had worked with some people, and then it hadn't worked with other people, and so you're lost, right? Because you don't know whether you should just throw it all in the bin and then just go back to, I don't know, giving them last month's men's health workout or doing the things that you like to do, or it's very difficult, right? So, but that's a lot of the time the foundation behind canned assessments and predicted templates and means of figuring out what someone needs to do, as opposed to the way that we look at things where every rep of every exercise is an assessment. It's an assessment of whether this is currently the most appropriate thing for that individual to be doing. Have they made a ton of progress recently, and actually we need to either progress again or actually just shift the way that we're doing things? And we're constantly making that assessment as to whether the current protocol is the most appropriate.
And you mentioned something earlier. This brings up, you said about the popularity that we're sort of this best kept secret type thing. Yeah. And even as we get known, I think our popularity is never going to be on the big scale for one simple reason, is that we require people to think. We want people to think. And again, sorry for the analogies, it's just the way I think. But I think by all this prediction stuff and canned assessments, whether it's from a picture or a simple, what became popular, I don't know much, I haven't heard much about it lately, but these movement screens that became very popular, they're looking for a simple mathematical 8 plus 2. So if I asked you what 8 plus 2 is, you'd say 10. There's only one answer. And I think people want to see, if I see you, I do this screen, this movement thing, and you can't do it, it must be this, so I must do this, like you said, this template, which may work. So we kind of reversed that and said, look, let's, instead of 8 plus 2 equals 10, let's take 10 and then figure out how many possibilities there are. And it's infinite. But you start making a list of these possibilities, and then what out of this, if this is a possible problem, what are the potential solutions? And you use your education plus experience plus
logic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Makes it easier. But you put this all together, and you won't be right every time, but it's an exploratory process. And the more you do it, the more you can center in on it.
But that's a good point, because basically, do static assessment don't allow people to think. I mean, they're just like, oh, you've got this, then do that, or you've got that, then do this, or maybe sometimes, okay, let's figure it out. But it's so to you, how can you know if something is good for a client or not?
I don't know. Let's find out.
That's always the answer, right?
It sounds weak, I think, but it is.
Yeah, people are going to be like, oh, it's easy to say that.
Well, it is, and that's, again, criticism that I've sat down, been emailed, whatever, is we never give answers, is because there's never really a specific answer. People want very specific answers to very general questions. And
yeah, in the Q&A box I posted for this podcast, I had a lot of questions. Oh, what do you think about that exercise? But I'm not going to bring up these questions because I know that's not what you do. Because, I mean, basically, we cannot tell if something is good or not.
Well, we would answer. Our first response would be...
Let's find out.
For who? No, it would be for who and what specific goal. And then I'd have to know for who, what do they have to work with, and all these things to explore.
The foundation of a course with us, a lot of the time, is highlighting joint movements, joint motions, that potentially would incur more risk than other ones, because that allows us to then make this cost-benefit analysis, right? So we look at what things could cause structural concerns, either acutely, so if we did this right now, but there's not a whole lot of stuff that causes acute issues unless there's a hell of a lot of force applied. So primarily what you end up looking at is the stuff that causes chronic issues. And those are the things that people will often do despite not realizing that there's risk involved with them, because it doesn't cause them pain right now. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, because the question was, how do you know if something is good for a client, right? And the first question is, well, does this have potential to be bad for them if they did it over and over again for an extended period of time? Because that's what we do with exercise, right? We take this thing and then we just do it really repetitively under a lot of load. And then the second question is going to be, is that providing stimulus that aligns with their goal? And the thing is that a lot of the time you might have clients with very specific goals, like I just want bigger muscle X, right? But that might be one of their key goals, but the rest of their goals are to also be a relatively well-functioning individual, in which case they want everything to get strong at doing everything effectively. And the way we phrase that is them owning everything that they have. But as long as this thing is helping improve the strength and functionality, and potentially as a consequence, as a side effect, the size of muscles in various parts of their body, and it's not going to cause any issues to the joint over time, or it's not obviously going to do so. People have different tolerance levels, and something that would be absolutely fine to someone else and low risk to the general population could cause a certain individual issues. But we can't predict that, and our responsibility as a trainer is to err on the side of the stuff that just, to the best of our knowledge, is unlikely or less likely to cause problems for someone.
And this concept has somehow reared its ugly head in the last social media era, because social media has taken this concept of risk and they took the concept of biomechanics and they overplayed it. The pendulum went from it didn't exist to everybody sort of embracing it. Then now it's going back the other way to saying, well, just because you do a perfect exercise, does that guarantee someone is or isn't going to get hurt? And this came up in, I had to interrupt the level 2 class.
Yeah.
And it was, I won't say the nationality, but it was a gentleman echoing a very common thought about a very controversial topic, not in my mind, but in social media's mind, about allowing the back to round off in certain exercises.
I wanted to touch on that.
Yeah. Okay, so allowing the spine to be in a flex position during either exercises that are compressive or shearing.
Yeah. And so, and this, what he said was a very common comeback I've heard from other trainers, you've heard, and it's certainly all over social media, which is, well, I've never had somebody get hurt doing it. And then the social media echoes it to say, well, there's no studies or research to support rounding off spine as being a contributing factor to low back issues over time. And then they cite gender and genetics and there are other daily life activities, and you said something just a second ago that, or one of you said it, that I can't control their gender and I can't control their genetics and I can't control what they do in daily life and I can't control the stresses in their life. But for that hour they're in the gym, I can control the forces I'm putting on their body. And if I can reduce the cost long-term to this joint and still guarantee, well, I shouldn't say the word guarantee, and still get the same benefit, then that's our responsibility. If there was some evidence that a bad position for a joint in an exercise also contributed to much greater stimulus, that would be an interesting discussion for some people. But there isn't. It just comes down to if this exercise, and done this way, in this position, adds potential long-term, and that's a key. I don't think people get this long-term thing. It's like cancer. It's like smoking. You don't get cancer from smoking a cigarette. And I can't guarantee you'll get cancer from smoking 3 packs a day. But what I can guarantee, based on the research that seems to be out there, is that every time you put one in your mouth, your risk
gradually
goes up. And the same thing can be said about certain joint positions under force. And so the long-term effects that people that we seem to forget about is really what we're talking about here.
And so you're not against flexing the spine.
It flexes and it extends.
Yeah.
And so it needs to be trained in flexion
Yeah.
extension. And there are probably some sport-related goals where it's unquestionable. Now, I won't name the social media side, but he knows I'm going to go off for about 3 hours on this, so I'll try to keep it short. But they started, and I don't know that it was their intention to put up the way it influenced people, but they put up the old way of thinking, which is to keep your, we say keep your back straight, which is really keep your spine in a relatively whatever neutral is for that person. That was the old way of thinking. And then it had a middle way of thinking, sort of, well, there's some movement allowed. And then the new way of thinking was allowing it to round off. I don't know if you've seen this.
Yeah.
And so you probably know
Yeah,
this.
on the course you talk about it.
Yeah. Yes, I do. I have to, because first of all, the fact that as soon as I see that going, the average person's going to look at that, and I certainly started reading the comments and said, well, I don't want to think the old way anymore. I want to go the new way. And so they even had research to support it. Well, I did something that I don't think many people did. I read the research, and it wasn't anything to do with supporting that point. So all this being said, our definition of exercise, what we've defined as training, you said owning their body, is basically making sure that this person, your client, has enough output at every position their structure allows, and their spine flexes in an extension. It should be trained in flexion extension, but when it's part of another exercise, let's say a row, cable row type thing, and somebody's allowing their spine to round off, and then is either extending it back. Even if we took away the risk, I'm saying, but if your goal was these muscles around the shoulder, what does moving your spine have to do with that goal, let alone the fact that you're putting potential stresses on the spine that can have long-term repercussions?
One of the other issues as well, though, is that it's very difficult to progress things when there are too many variables involved. So if we're taking any kind of concern about someone's spine and the way that we're going to load it, then how are we isolating that variable? If we're allowing it to be part of multiple things, and then if we're allowing it, often the more variables you have, the more likelihood you'll see from inertial effects. And then if you're looking at an exercise like a row, you're looking at something that has a poorly matched resistance profile to the strength profile, so there's even more of a tendency for someone to get inertial effects involved. And it just makes things very difficult to be controlled with. And that's a lot of the time what we're looking at doing.
Like when you're doing, let's say, a flexion row, that row is a flexed spine.
Oh, it's what's it called? A Jefferson curl.
No, flexion row. So you do a row.
Oh, flexion row.
With a flexed spine.
Right.
And the
then
issue
you
would be,
Oh.
but the issue would be you don't know
Is that what
how
they
much,
call them? Flexion rows?
I mean, I've heard the flexion row saying.
Okay.
From the...
Which is crazy because you're never challenging flexion. It's an extension row.
Yeah.
It's an extension row.
Yeah. But, I mean, because maybe you're going for a flex
Well, it's the
position.
same as a prone bench press, but that's a different
But
story.
let's say a flexion row. The issue would be maybe you're getting really strong at your back, but your spine is not adapting that quickly, right?
And we do have to acknowledge the fact that as I said before, Davis's law says that properly progressed, I have to acknowledge it, it's potential that the ligaments and discs can adapt, but I'm not willing to take that chance. I'm not willing to take that chance and put that kind of load on the spine because it doesn't add any extra benefit. They'll talk about the stretch. We can talk about that later. That's a whole misnomer, but you're adding another. If your goal was muscles that move the shoulder, I don't know how any muscles on the hip or spine you would want them involved, unless your goal is to see how many plates you can get going up and down.
And so you were talking about social media posts about like say flexion of the spine, whatever. And do you think the issue with social media is that people, hypertrophy, whatever, they take it to the extreme? One extreme or one other, like this. I mean, and I wanted to touch on pull arounds and lengthened partials. Do you think they just take that, cherry pick something, and then put it like, oh, it's the new thing?
Absolutely. There's no question. And that doesn't mean that there aren't good people on social media that put out good content. But social media, and I just learned about it, he's educated me on this. I learned the term only a couple years ago, clickbait. the way you get popular is you make a definitive statement that is so extreme. You put down somebody else who's well known. You make a statement. You have a red X, don't do this. Green check, do it. And that's the way it is for everybody. And social media has glorified these points to, I think, a dangerous level.
Well, it feeds off novelty, right?
Yeah.
That's
what people need.
That's what people need.
That's what people want. Yeah. They don't need that.
Yeah, it's funny because it's also the same thing that gives you the most soreness a lot of the time the next day, right? So it's you find it novelty ends up just breeding so much in the environment of fitness content because you've got people that are looking for a new piece of content to make, right? They're like, oh, well, I can't just do another video on how to do a bicep curl with control and some... No, I need something new for my followers. So they go out looking for something to make new content about. And then the people that are watching the content are looking for something new and interesting to watch. So then they gravitate towards that as well. And then they try that thing, whatever this new thing happens to be, and it gives them a new sensation, a new feeling, and a new amount of soreness maybe. And so then it provides verification and validation to that whole process because they get the ding at the end where they go, oh, I feel different this morning. That new piece of stuff that someone created that I was hungry for has now created this. I need to go and tell everyone else about it. And then stuff just propagates.
I don't disagree with him, but I don't even think sensation is the big. I just think people want to just be the first one to post. So they get a hold of somebody's new information and then it's reposted in their words, their language. I won't mention names, but it's fun to watch this. Fun, not meaning...
Well, it's interesting then because you can almost claim ownership of it as well, right?
Yeah.
It's
and
like
name an exercise after you.
Oh, exactly, and then put a flag in the ground.
That.
Yeah,
yeah. I don't know, because probably someone did it before you, but you're just the first one to put a name on it.
No, you not only put your name on something that's existed before that never had a name. Tom there were some exercises that he created that are spread around social media now. And when they were referred to by his name, he said, stop it. He said, I don't want my name on it because it's just adding a different force from a different direction to this common movement. People not only name exercises that were pre-existing, but now they're naming certain ranges of an exercise just for them. So they take an existing exercise and go, but if you do it in this range, I get to label it after my name.
It's just and again, that's massively driven by the social media side of things, right? Because then people start almost accidentally referencing you as they do the exercise and then they call it that thing. And this comes back to a lot of the reasons why we've never had a big social media following is there's not this desire to stake a claim for those areas of information property. There is stuff that is RTS IP that Tom has registered and trademarked. And the irony is a lot of that stuff often isn't getting referenced. People are saying things like strength profiles and resistance profiles and even talking about stuff like the exercise equation or continuums and not appropriately referencing Tom and RTS, which is hilarious considering they then go and use someone else's name on an exercise that they didn't even create.
If you went to his own page online, you would see a long list of things that are common language in this industry. Some are really dated. You go back to the knee over the toe soundbite type thing. Yeah. But you go back and you look at this long list of things that is part of our everyday language, or at least was, and it can really be traced back to him.
And so that's the interesting thing. And that's probably why you don't have a huge following, because people don't want that. They don't want to learn how to think. They just want sound bites. That's the saying.
We had a president many years ago, John F. Kennedy, and he had a long quote, but the last line of the quote was, people enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought. People just want to be told what to think, and social media does that for them. And I'm not saying everybody, but it seems to have influenced that quite a bit in discussions in class, in questions in class. I'm trying to prepare for them because I know they're going to come, and I want to handle them respectfully. But sometimes people have made up their mind. I heard it from this guy, and he has 1 million followers, and you only got 2,000. So there.
It's very difficult, right? Also to produce content. It's something that we've worked on for a while now, and we're trying to improve and have a bit more social media presence, while at the same time not contributing negatively to the fitness information landscape. And the problem you've got, especially if you're like a solo creator for this stuff, and you know, we see this even with our own students, right? When they get given this information, they're going, "Oh, I want to use it," and you make that piece of controversial content, and then the algorithm from the interactions that generates rewards you for it. And it's so difficult to check yourself and be like, okay, that's not how professionals do things. I'm not going to keep doing that, because it keeps encouraging you to do so. And like, we're also quite understanding of the fact that well, certainly I am, of the fact that I've got people like Mark and Tom who are watching what we do as a business, going, because they've got this pre-social media perspective of professionalism and how to present information. They're going, hold on a second, that's not how we do things. And I'm going, oh yeah. So okay, no, we need to keep ourselves in check. But I having been that person before I joined RTS with my content as well, I saw how that worked, and I saw how that got me a lot of traction. And it really was a process of reassessing also how I wanted to be perceived in the industry. Because when I make content about exercise that generates a lot of interaction, it doesn't generate a lot of respect from my peers.
Agreed.
It generates a lot of eyeballs from the general public.
Agreed.
Which maybe will get me a couple of clients here and there. But if I'm looking for a long-term career in this industry, I probably care about what my colleagues in the industry also think about the way that in which I conduct myself.
And about career and your peers, do you consider yourselves, you and you, as experts into biomechanics or exercise mechanics?
Not remotely.
We spend too much time around Tom to even think we even have a clue what we're doing. Yeah.
And is he
no,
an expert?
and he would tell you. I heard this in an interview. Somebody tried to trap him, and he just had the best response. But it was a question where don't you think you should be an expert in your field to teach? And Tom said, yes, you should be an expert in your field to teach. And then the person later on tried to trap him by saying, so what do you consider yourself? He goes, well, I'm just a beginner. But he meant a beginner on the experts. It's like on the scale, not beginner, but he was just at the beginner. And so just when we think we grasp something, and he's taught me so much because he's got a much better background in this, and I've been doing this for 30 years. But you just, no, that word is a scary word. We consider ourselves lifelong students of this subject, trying to always get better at it.
It'd be so boring.
Yeah.
To be at that place, right? And to feel like you didn't have anything else to learn.
Yeah, because then that means you don't have anything to do. You can just sit here and you're an expert.
Maybe.
Yeah.
You don't have anything else to do.
I'll revert to a movie. Maybe someday they'll have the Matrix thing where you do lie in the chair and you stick the thing in your head and you know everything about biomechanics. But until then, you just keep exploring things because people keep coming up with new movements and new machines, and it's constant exploring.
Yeah, I mean, it's even at the moment, Tom's doing a ton of work to study and experiment on where we are strong and how to better build and design exercise around that. And he's making so much progress in that because that's what he's very focused on at the moment. But he's been focused on this for 35 years and he's still making progress in that department. We've got a little bit of a luxury in that we're his sort of global speaker for this, his outlet. We're the messengers.
We talk a lot about him. I'm sure people, I'll put all the details in the description of this video for people to look at the website and all of that, because we talk about Tom Purvis, but they probably don't know who he is. It's actually in France, RTS is not popular, Tom Purvis is not either, but people know Ben Pakulski. They know Joe Bennett, hypertrophy coach.
And they'll all tell you they got their information.
And they all did great. I saw Joe Bennett did a video on everything I learned from Tom Purvis, and same with Ben Pakulski.
Ben's done that
and
too.
So that's important because I know some people in France that take this information from them, but then they don't know about Tom Purvis, and so maybe at some point they should try to also learn from the origin.
Well, we since we teamed up 5 years ago. It's been sort of a much more focused effort to get the word out into regions. We've done very well in Asia, Middle East. We're doing well. The U.S. Tom's well known. He's well known in the professionals in the industry.
True, yeah.
But you're right. The word everyone thinks. Then when we teach a course, I shouldn't say everyone, when we teach a course and they see us talking about an exercise a certain way, they said, oh, you got that from this group. And I said, well, you mean the thing that we were teaching 30 years ago when this person who you said we got it from was just born? I don't think so.
One of the main reasons why a lot of people won't have heard about Tom in this modern era of social media is you're not allowed to film anything during RTS classes with him.
Yeah, that's right.
So because his gym is effectively full of all of his experiment equipment, a lot of that stuff is proprietary. So you will never see or very, very rarely, because people have to ask permission and then they have to film it from a certain angle so it's not compromising of any of the IP in the room. But you'll very rarely see any content from class, and that a lot of the time is how education gains a bit of traction. But because you're not allowed to do that, and another part of the reason is that you talked earlier about the difficulty in making content that forces people to think on social media, and a lot of time it's because of kind of the fact that it gets chopped and context gets removed.
90 seconds.
Exactly, and then from our perspective as people providing education, we don't want people to get left with that lack of context, because a lot of the time it can remove the nuance and the caveats that we might have put in place before we made that statement, and it's as a result misrepresented the statement. And then that's not what we're looking for, right? We want people to really have a true and proper understanding of what they will learn on an RTS course.
Okay, so I think we can conclude that part on, let's say, what was it? Yeah, rethinking about just exercise. And so basically, if I've got a short biceps and I go into full range of motion, it's probably not an issue.
No, you should primarily just do skull crushes for your biceps then.
And don't squat with that short bicep.
Yeah, don't do squats,
because that's just not going to work out well.
The second topic, and I think people are also here for that, it's hypertrophy and optimization of exercise. And we talked about naming exercise after you named the Benny squat or whatever. I don't know.
Did you do that?
Yeah, I did. It's when you just sit at the bottom and stay there for 5 minutes.
Great way of.
Because I'm going to.
It's a lengthened isometric.
Mine's going to be 6 minutes, and I'll name it after me.
Yeah, and maybe just on 90 degrees.
When you say hypertrophy, you're talking about, if you remember early on, I said there's two parts to an exercise. There's only two things that can happen when you stimulate a muscle. It will get strong. It will get better at doing its job. Elbow flexors will get better at elbow flexion. And if you do it under the right conditions and the right nutrition, the right recovery, it will grow. Hypertrophy, that's the adaptation.
Yeah. So when I talk about hypertrophy, I talk about the trends around hypertrophy. So the first one is, and I know you did two great Instagram reels about that, lengthened partials, because I had a lot of questions on my Q&A box on Instagram. So the first question was, do you know if all the muscles react the same to long muscle length? And the second thing is, are lengthened partials the new thing that you need to do to optimize and to take the set further and further in order to get more out of it? And what are the main drawbacks of that?
Well, where do I start?
Yeah.
The research seems to be varied quite a bit. So to the best of my knowledge, and I got to put that as a strong disclaimer, what I've read is there are only a small group of muscles, biarticular muscles, that can even get to this position that people are talking about. And the second thing that I've read that seems to be prevailing, but more so on the side of, and this is only when you just start out, as what they call a newbie, and you're new in the gym, but eventually, and I don't know what they're defining as new and how soon that goes away, 1 month, 2 months, whatever. I think it's my opinion that it's just probably one of the biggest sound bites. I'd say one of the top 5 I certainly know it's going to come up in class every time. And I don't know how much stock to put in it, because to the point I was trying to make, we're not disclaiming it. We can't say that there isn't something to it. I'm going to leave that for all the people to go back and forth online about, let the researchers. What I would ask them to consider, which is why I made that social media reel, why we made it, is the joints. And what position are you taking the joints into? I'm not saying that going to a lengthened position is always detrimental to every joint, but it's a consideration no one seems to even be talking about. Can that person even be, do they have the joint, are you taking that joint beyond what that person came to you with? Because if you are, then you're starting to stretch things that weren't designed to be stretched, and now we're back to the tendons and ligaments and things like that.
And so in order to know that, you need to see the the individual exercising, right?
You need to see it. You need to I guess I would have to consider, when they talk about something like that and they talk about hypertrophy, my mind goes to Mr. Olympia, going, all right, if you're dealing with a high caliber athlete, it might be something you would look into. Where I have a problem with it is when it's applied to, what did you say earlier?
Even at that
Doris?
level, though. Oh, Doris, yeah.
Yeah, even at that level, I mean, I'm just saying that if there was something to it, and I'm saying if, not doubting it and not accepting it, I'm just saying if there was something to it, which I see more people online, some that I actually respect quite a bit, saying it's really not the thing that people are making it out to be. But if you go back to our definition, we've been talking about the lengthened end of the range, along with the middle and shortened range from the very beginning. You take a client, Mr. Olympia or Doris, who may compete in the Olympia, and you take them and you train them, progress them so that they can, you challenge their available joint range of motion appropriately over time, lengthened, middle, and shortened.
There are just, you know how the question was, is it the same for all muscles? Like, does it apply to all muscles?
Yeah.
Do they all respond the same?
Yeah, they all respond
the question is, when we look at training in that lengthened range exclusively or specifically, that doesn't look the same for all muscles in itself. If we use biceps as an example, right, we could say, okay, with a bicep curl, I'm gonna just train the length and range in partials there. The problem is that doesn't, I would use less weight than if I was doing a normal curl, right? I'd have to go with less weight because my biceps lose leverage over the axis of my elbow joint. So I'd have to take a lighter weight to operate in that range. And as a result, if I just did one without biasing the lengthened range and just did like a normal bicep curl, I'd get just as much stimulus there and then be able to do the rest of my rep, but with heavier weight that my biceps were capable of producing enough torque for. So we've got this situation where that doesn't make as much sense. But then if we were talking about another thing that involved my biceps, but was, say, a rowing movement, going back to the rows that we talked about earlier and how I referenced them having a poor amount of resistance relative to how strong you are. Well, if I did a lengthened partial in that, what I'd be able to do is use way more weight than I would do a normal row with, because I'm way stronger here than I am here. And as a result, I'd be able to provide an appropriate amount of challenge to my pullers, my pulling muscles in this range, relative to what I would here. So I've ended up with two very different situations, one making a little bit more sense in terms of the stimulus and the uniqueness of the stimulus that I'm able to provide to the exercise in a row, than a biceps curl which might be negatively contributing. Because also, depending on what angle, say we're just talking about like a dumbbell bicep curl, right? What angle I'm using, I could end up with the weight weighing nothing because it's stacked directly over the joint in the position that I'm almost at my strongest. So and I mean, there's tons of flaws to even the conclusions that they made from the studies, right? I think the first one that made them start thinking about this was they compared seated hamstring curl to a prone one.
I was going to talk about that. Yeah.
How were you going to ask that?
No, it's just, it was just about, can we trust the research? And I was going to quote this one about, and I've done that course, a famous course, I'm not going to name it, but where you learn about research a lot. And they say, seated hamstring curl is better for hypertrophy than a lying leg curl based on the research we have. What do you think about that? And can we trust the research when we look at that type of research and how it was done?
I just want to go back and say one thing, just to address something you said, because it was one of those middle of the night things, and you probably came to the conclusion a long time ago, but the back to the length and partial things, and it was one of these things I thought finally, it was like hit me one night, not that long ago, maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, where it was about the pulling movement specifically, going, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with the lengthened position, this has people just choose a heavier weight where they were stronger, and all right, is it the length of position or is it the load? And I get nervous when people talk about positions because that means joints, but they were loading something they'd never appropriately loaded before unless they had access to.
I mean, the irony is that, to flip that on its head, if you were looking at squats or deadlifts, you may well see more gains, more stimulus from doing shortened partials. Because in those exercises, it happens to be the shortened range of your muscles, I've never thought of it like this, that is under-challenged. However, if you looked at a row, it's the lengthened range that is under-challenged. And with a press, that stuff flip-flops over the course of your set, and it's kind of difficult to get an idea about. But I think what is potentially the case here is that there is potential benefit, and beneficial stimulus to be found by training in partial ranges, particularly in a situation where the exercises that you're doing for the rest of the range don't appropriately challenge that range.
Yep.
And but then you've also got to look at how people end up executing as well, right? Because there's no point training in a partial range and using momentum to move things around, and then also, as Dr. Marks mentioned earlier, not bearing in mind the fact that if you take a pulling exercise, right, you're suddenly taking the weight and making it way higher. Say you're taking a bicep exercise, you're taking that weight and making it way higher, and then putting the joint at the end of its range. So we also need to be conscious of how things are changing, but there's so much more to this conversation that just gets missed when we're trying to make a reel about it.
And the biggest mistake, and this came up at the level 2 course, it came up very strongly, is that, and it was a discussion I even had with Tom in Germany having coffee before we went to FIBO, which is people are suddenly mistaking a movement with a muscle. So they're saying the lengthened position of the chest, and you're going, wait a minute, okay, that's a chest press, and you got other muscles contributing. So it's this position that has a bunch of other factors to consider, not just this one muscle, but people seem to be confusing those quite a bit. And that's a massive mistake.
And there's just, as soon as they start trying to design exercises exclusively to achieve that, they start potentially compromising on other elements of the exercise, on any of the other variables, the stability, the joint integrity. So we need to be careful and actually appropriately understand those things before we start messing with that stuff.
So back to your research question.
Yeah.
So the stability side of things is a big part of that question, right? And then the execution.
I was told, I'm going to have to tell the story real quickly. This is a nutrition story real quickly, but when I was in school, in chiropractic school, Franco Colombo came to our area, and he was doing a nutrition lecture, and he was talking about supplements, and he said, if you really want to know if a supplement works, here's how you have to do it. This was brilliant. This is long time ago. And he said, you have to set your life so that for this 8-week period, 12-week period, you get up at the same time, you eat the same food, you do everything the same, boom, boom, boom. You eat everything the same, you take all this, except the one difference, the one variable was the one supplement. And then you have to compare it to another exactly the same everything. So the key word here is variables. And you change one thing. So the controlling of variables in research and how people interpret it and read it, I'm not saying all research is bad. There's some good stuff out there. But people just knee-jerk and say, and I'll tell you, right, when they post, we now know. There's a famous influencer that starts out we now know, going, no, you don't know. You now have a piece of research, and if it's done well, it says, this seems to suggest the following based on this, but more research needs to be done. But we now knee-jerk and go, I can prove now, don't do preacher girls with a short bicep.
No,
So-
and it just basically the research kind of just moved the needle of what you think. Like maybe it's gonna tend a bit more into that way and then into that way, and at the end of the day, it's also about your professional practice where you think about things and not just about the research, because that would be a bit. I mean,
The first thing we would tell people is if you're going to rely on research, then start looking at how they control the variables. When they compare two exercises, did anyone talk about how they even instructed the exercise, how they did it, the ranges that they moved through, let alone the sleep they got, the food they ate, all the other movements were part of this?
and the machine itself.
The machine
Th-
itself?
that was the issue about the lying versus seated leg curl. They didn't. I mean, they put. I mean, I remember on the research, like they put the pics of the machines, but they don't analyze machines.
All right, there you go.
They could have had completely different profiles.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the and also, I mean, just to come back to like muscle length and tension. People, and especially I see that in France, people like, I mean, they've got that huge confusion and they don't know the difference between both. They're saying that when you've got tension, let's say on the stretch position, you are at the fully lengthened range or fully lengthened biceps, but you could have like more tension. I mean, at the stretch without the bicep really be like lengthened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's also the saying is that, I mean, kind of misleading because in French it's kind of the same words.
Yeah, you could have biceps in its longest position under no tension.
Exactly.
And then have it in its shortened position under max tension. And then, you know, it gets confused because we hear crazy phrases like peak contraction, which is when, for a lot of people, the peak contraction is when it's in its most shortened position because, I don't know, that's when they see the EMG graph go craziest.
Which is not meaningful.
Yeah. So there's just confusing bits of information in there that kind of pollute the waters.
And there's good people. I'm not sure you referred to something earlier. I'll throw out a name, see if it elicits a response. But there's a couple people out there, Chris Beardsley, that puts out a lot of research. He throws it out there, but he doesn't make any claims other than, hey, here's some stuff I found. And then the good people kind of say, well, that's interesting. Here's some questions to ask. But the majority of people go, we now proven that weightlifting doesn't do anything for you or something like that. I mean, they take it. It's so at face value. It's like they got the new thing.
But I mean, here's the thing as well, right? And coming back to what you were talking about in terms of how it's done. Who's generally involved in research studies?
I mean, newbies.
Yeah.
Or, I mean...
20-year-olds.
Yeah.
College students.
College students.
Yeah. So you've got newbies are generally doing these reps, which is the way it's done is one of the variables. You've just taken an RTS course last weekend, right? We had various personal trainers do various exercises. Almost all of them, relative to what their last rep looked like, the first reps before they had any cueing from our side, they looked like trash. And they were personal trainers who were good at doing these things. Imagine what those reps look like when some newbie who's just showing up because they need $100 to get through their, to buy groceries at college is doing their reps. Like, that's going to look nothing like the amount of control that this stuff could be done under, with the intensity of execution this stuff could be done under, and the consistency of execution. Like, it's so difficult to draw any conclusions from that, particularly when, if we're a good, consistent, observant, inquisitive coach, we've actually been running a pretty good study for the past 1 month to 100 months, which is on the person that's with us, and it sits in our notebook, and it's some notes that we've taken about how things are progressing for them, what seems to work for them, and what seems to not.
If you take some
do.
notes, that's important to mention. If you take some notes, because I know a lot of PTs or just trainers in general, they do a program, but they don't track the data. So it's impossible to know if...
And sometimes it's not just data, right? Like the part of the issue with the way that we track this stuff and we run studies effectively on our clients is we're so inherently obsessed with, did the numbers move? You look at the average trainer's notebook, and it's did the number of reps they do with the amount of weight, did that go up over time? That's not the only way that we can track progress with someone, right? There's so many other things that we should be taking note of. In fact, you could almost argue that's the least important thing to be in your book.
Unless they're entering a contest.
But even then, unless they're entering a powerlifting contest.
Yeah.
But I think that was a running
bodybuilding.
Well, bodybuilding, the last thing they should ever worry about is anything about a number. It should be
progressing.
How hard they work.
Yeah.
Based,
and how they look in the mirror.
Yeah. We, in our, as you know from the continuum, that's the difference between the internal and the external thing. And bodybuilders have no reason to go to anything external unless it's an ego thing, and nothing wrong with that. And, you know, every guy, every guy was, how much do you bench? And it was all about a number. But then the association was, well, that means your chest gets bigger. Going, no, not necessarily. It's not about, you can't make that correlation.
And it's about just progressing also and being able to standardize kind of the movement and progressing the movement. So that's why, do you think, and that was a question, do you think we, as, let's say, bodybuilders, for the people I coach or that listen to that, have to standardize the reps?
What do you mean by that?
The same duration. In order to progress, because I've got a lot of people being like, okay, I need to do that 1 second stretch at the bottom every rep for every single week, and if I don't do that, then it doesn't count.
I tend to, there was something that was said earlier, and I'm going to tie it into this question, I think, that we go back to the length end or the shortened end, and which end should I work in, or standard. The great thing about going to the gym is you get to make choices, and you get to change things all the time. And you know, which X should I do, hip thrusts or squats? Which are better? I get to do them both. My gyms, I signed a contract that said they allow me 2 exercises choices. I don't have to choose one. I don't have to choose a standardized rep. And I think, I'm not an expert at this, but I think truly to adapt, not constantly, meaning every day, every workout, but you do have to keep throwing new things at your body, different rep ranges, different tempos, different exercises, different angles. And at the end of the day, it's probably all going to contribute.
It is a tricky one, because I can see it being more important when someone is new. Because things need to be very standardized to ensure that you don't exceed their tolerance. Particularly the ranges, right? The ranges that we're working in, we need to make sure, did you just talk about pressing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we talk about pressing, right, if you exceed the range or go slightly deeper in a press, you dramatically increase the amount of tension being placed on someone's pecs, because the weight doesn't drop off, but the internal leverage of their pecs drops off. So as a result, their pecs have to work a lot harder the further back you go, just to create the same amount of force. So if we can, and sometimes machines get heavier at the same time, so then you see the amount of
like we were talking about that Jim Leco chest press,
which is an incredible piece of equipment for 80% of your range, but then a really dangerous piece of equipment for the other 20. Yeah. So, and it's remarkable, right? That something. And this comes down to like the intricacies of why this stuff is so important to understand, because something can literally be, as far as we've noticed recently, the best piece of equipment on the market for 80% of the range, and if it's used slightly incorrectly, can be one of the most dangerous pieces of equipment on the market. So that you have this requirement from someone who's going to actually be a professional at getting people to use this thing to understand that stuff. But so if we're not seeing a standardization in that rep, then we're increasing risk.
Yeah.
Massively. And so at the same time, if we're trying to teach someone how to own their bodies and control their bodies, we need to standardize the environment, because otherwise if every week something was different, right? If every week you tried to learn a different language, then you'd not get particularly good at specific language first. So it's about helping them achieve that, and then we can be really structured with how we progress load and reps and all that kind of stuff, and stay within their tolerance. Once someone is quite experienced and is able to it's not relearning every week, right? at this point they're just exploring stuff and they're trying stuff. Then you could start to argue that the requirement for standardization of the reps decreases. And I don't know if you'd agree with this, but it's where my head's currently at with this stuff. And obviously a result of training a lot with Tom, and then working with my clients that are just, they're all over the place, man. People, when they show up to the gym, the stuff that they've done earlier in the day, the stuff that the level of preparation they have to be in the gym relative to their sleep and their nutrition and stuff like that, from what I've learned from RTS and working with Tom, is that the thing that's almost more important to measure is effort. And as long as they are consistently either progressing effort or consistently applying an appropriate amount of effort to their sessions, you see progress. Like the numbers go up as long as when they get in the gym, they try hard. And if there are days when they're not equipped to try as hard as they did last time, and they just try as to their max current capability of it, at least they didn't go backwards during today's session. And then they're in a good position to try hard and make progress on the next one.
I do agree. I mean, when I said variations and throwing different things, it certainly didn't mean every workout or even any period of time. You have to get comfortable and skilled and get really good at something dialed in before it's time to make a change. Even as something as simple as taking your incline bench and going up or down a notch, and then getting used to that, whether it takes one session or a couple weeks. But the standardization, and this is I'm almost hesitant to say because it's almost too cliche now, but the whole standardization of giving a certain rep range, we're gonna do this number today. And I get where numbers are important to people in the beginning, although I used to educate people that let's see if we can get away from that, but they still, in their mind, wanted to know, and numbers were certainly a measurement of progress, or numbers meaning both reps and the amount of weight. But a skilled trainer knows that even though the client's thinking a certain number, you may stop too short, or you may keep going based on the appropriate reps still being done and still having something left there to do them correctly.
Yeah, you're not really pushing yourself very hard if all of your sets happen to end at a convenient number.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, when you're doing like three sets of 12.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so that's why. So I had another question, like heavy or light. We could argue about what that means, but that doesn't matter as long as you apply a different.
Challenge.
Yeah, challenge.
But just challenge.
But one thing that we should probably say at this stage that we should have said earlier, maybe, when we talk about exercise mechanics and we talk about why, like why should anyone give a shit? And maybe for bodybuilders, if you align resistance slightly better with muscles, you might be able to see more stimulus to certain muscles. And that might, the one thing that might help you do is reduce the effects of genetics. What we never say is that's going to help you build that muscle, because the thing that tends to dictate which muscles, the course we were on this weekend, one of the guys had just really interesting genetics, had massive rear delts, had rear delts so disproportionately big to the rest of his arm that it looked like he had jacked triceps because of the way they wrapped around his shoulder.
Of this?
We didn't get any photos of this, but also had like really solid bicep peaks as well.
Yeah, he had that short biceps.
Yeah, he had the short biceps. Yeah, so this guy's arms were really interesting from a genetics point of view.
We're talking about Dubai?
No, this was in Singapore.
Oh, okay.
And the likelihood that it was actually really difficult for us to get him to do any kind of middle delt exercise that didn't get his rear delts involved because of how much they kind of wrapped through that portion of his...
Never seen that. That's always people's seemingly weak point. And
it was an interesting thing for us to look at. But it's like, okay, in that situation, if we got really good at being specific with how we lined up the resistance relative to his to his middle delts and the arm path that he was using, we might be able to reduce the effects of genetics, where previously his rear delts were just going, we're great, we're just going to do all this for you. And now we managed to kind of brush them aside a little bit. But that might matter to someone who was a competitive bodybuilder or just really weirdly obsessed with their own middle delts. But the main reason to care about this stuff is joints. And if we looked at the difference between heavy and light, and we looked at the studies and went, oh, there doesn't seem to be a big difference between hypertrophy, fine. But if you look at the amount of load being placed on a joint during that exercise, then it starts to matter. Then it starts to be a concern. And I'm not saying one or the other is better, because you could say, well, heavy means more load placed on the joint. And you could also say, well, light means that joint's got to go through more repetitions. So who knows really, right? Like, for example, I've got an issue with my elbow joint, and on triceps work or biceps work, I prefer to go heavy because I don't want that. It feels funky each time I go through a rep, but it doesn't feel any worse when it's heavier or light. So I'm just like, well, then fewer reps, I guess, because that seems to result in less of the grinding stuff. So there's not a better or worse thing, because equally, I've had clients have a situation where as soon as something gets too heavy, their joint can't tolerate that load. But if I drop the load a little bit and then I increase the number of reps, they're absolutely fine. So when we start talking about mechanics and why this stuff matters, and when we apply that to bodybuilders, it's not just, oh, this helps you build your middle delts, right? Because then it's a question of how much tax are you paying per rep? How much is each rep costing you? Because if it costs you less to do a rep, then maybe you can do more per week. And if you can do more per week from some of the studies that we've seen about volume, well, then maybe I might get more gains. Or if I can do more with less cost, maybe I'm less likely to get injured.
And the way I look at it, and if I was to take on a client now, I'd say, someone like him, I'd say, and not only might you get bigger, but I'd like you still doing this when you're my age. I'd like, if we can reduce the cost to the joints over time, that means you get to still do this. And I don't know how many people, I know there's plenty, but they drop out in their 50s, 60s, and 70s because of the wear and tear, the cost, the tax, as you refer to, on the joints.
And then you got people like yourself still doing 25 plates on the leg press at the...
Yeah. Even Thomas said to me, you may want to think about just cutting that in half and doing lots of reps. And my ego... My ego won't allow it, but
as long as
my joints are kind of begging for it.
I also had that interesting question that refers a bit to a video from Tom Purvis and a video you did on the RTS course is, when you have a scoliosis, are there stuff you can you gotta avoid? And you had that interesting video of you may explain the story.
Well, the story of the picture in the video. Yeah. Well, I was in the late 1990s. I was in Mexico and I was in a gym, and the discussion came up about what would you do with a client with scoliosis, and they brought me this X-ray, the one that you saw in the video, and it's like, in my career as a chiropractor, I'd never seen one that severe.
It was like that.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are ones that are more. What was interesting was, and I said, I kind of said in a joking way, be nice, it'd be great to meet this lady. Well, she's right over there. And I went up to her, and she spoke English, and I explained why I was going to ask her these questions and why I had got her on film. But she had no discomfort or pain. In fact, she wasn't even aware of it. They talk about a landmine. It's a phrase we use for a hidden injury that could go off. But she wasn't even aware of it until she fell off a horse and had to go get X-rays just to make sure it was okay. And the doctor said, "Are you aware of this?" And suddenly she became paranoid. And the trainers asked, what do we do with her? And my response is, you're not going to, and I know this is going to get some response from people that believe in certain almost cult-like following.
Witchery.
The famous 3 exercise.
Yeah, well, not the famous. There's an organization out there now that's going to jump all over this, and I won't say it, but it's above our pay grade. What we can do as a trainer is strengthen everything around it so that this person can live and continue to operate, and most people with a scoliosis can. And they can even do movements. It's just that the movements have to be adjusted based on what that structure currently allows. And if it so happens that in strengthening muscles there's some slight alteration, but I'm sorry, you don't straighten those things out.
Yeah, that will answer to the question. because it's a good
Yeah,
one.
and I know that there's going to be people. I know exactly where I'm predicting that they put photos up, and sorry, this just doesn't happen.
Another thing you touched on a reel is nowadays we see a lot of unilateral exercises becoming more popular. And two questions I have. First of all, are they essential? Second thing is, do we have to consider these exercises as advanced exercise? And a lot of, I mean, because you've got two sides of things. You've got the side of saying of people saying, "Oh, just do them. They're great, aligns properly. You can have like, let's say, like on the pull down, great lat stimulation." And other people say, "Oh, you got to build a foundation and do like bilateral first and build some muscle. And once you have the muscle, then you can do that type of exercise." What do you think about that?
Well, I would have to answer it from the RTS perspective of I'd have to have the person in front of me because I can't say from day one. There may be a reason from day one that unilateral is something to consider.
And nothing is essential.
Yeah, and the essential.
Going to the gym
Yeah.
isn't essential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if
It may be great.
Yeah.
it's the reel I made was simply to get people to consider everything about it that I don't think they do. So like when we go to the gym, unless you're doing it between your 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock client, you go to the gym at your time and you're finished when you're done, whether it's 45 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes. And you don't think about, well, if I do this exercise, we don't generally, we as serious practitioners or serious gym goers, we don't think about time. We look at the clock and go, I'll finish when I'm done. And we'd like our workouts to be more efficient. You know, time is important. But when somebody's paying you for an hour, time has to be a factor. And I think that unilateral exercises have a place. They have a very strong place. They have certain benefits that you can't get bilaterally. Weaknesses on one side, structural alignment, research that I seem to remember a long time ago that a lot of people still say that if you do a unilateral movement, you can potentially divert more force to one side. But that's assuming that you've stabilized everything. So if you're doing a unilateral row, you can't just say, well, I'm going to get more stimulation out of the lats because you now have to account for a rotational force that I didn't have to do with a bilateral row. But at the same time, if I had spinal issues, I probably can only handle half the weight here than I can here. So all these factors go into decisions. And once again, I go, look, bilateral is good and unilateral is good as well, as long as you're factoring in the time element and the other forces you may be adding in.
You have anything to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I think it's, again, the content that we try to produce and the way that we are just generally trying to get people to think is look at all the variables involved in an exercise and make a decision about its suitability based on that. But a lot of the time people aren't able to identify those variables, let alone objectively assess how they fit into the person that's in front of them.
Yeah.
And we get too clouded by the things that we like to do in the gym. And if we're well built and we've got a fair bit of muscle on us already, then sometimes unilateral stuff just makes it so much easier to line things up because shit's just getting in the way and we end up diverging on everything and we're trying to line things
Never
up.
been my
etc.
problem.
Yeah, but the thing is, equally, you could have stuff that's built in the gym for bodybuilders because they're the ones that like the biggest people to get into it, and as a result, it doesn't line up for a smaller client. So
Prime equipment.
yeah, I mean, whatever. There's so many of the brands that are just handles end up out here, and you've got 45 kilo ladies with their arms out here going, "How am I meant to use this thing?" So it's just a matter of looking at these variables and saying, how am I going to manipulate these things? And under what circumstances would that be better for my client based on stability, based on ability to align path of motion, or what situations might that actually be detrimental and I'd be better off looking at this in a different light?
When I worked with a large club chain in the Midwest of the U.S. for many years and still have an association with them. But when I was very active for the 2001 to 2018, I would go into a gym and I would watch a trainer do something, and I would wait till after the client left, and I would say, I'd ask questions. Why did you do it this way? And they knew, I want you to defend what you do, but don't get defensive. Just be able to rationalize. And please don't say you saw it on YouTube or Instagram, because that's not a good response. And that's why I think the unilateral and lengthened partials are the two most certainly unilateral. They just came from Switzerland, which is phenomenal. One of the best gyms I've ever seen in the world, but very old school. But now everyone in there, I'd say 80% of the lifters were doing primarily unilateral stuff, which is fine for their workouts. But when you have a client, I'd ask the trainer, as you said, make a list. What is this? What is doing it this way? Give me better, and what does it take away? And then make your choice, but don't just do it because it is the new thing.
Because the primary influence, so you just made me think of one of the core concepts here, is the primary reason why people employ a personal trainer is efficiency.
Yeah, getting to your goals
Quicker, and with not just in terms of how long it's going to take me to get there, but how many sessions a week am I going to do? How much time am I going to have to spend in the gym? And it's stuff like lengthened partials, for example. Like if you've got nothing else to do with your day other than when you're done with your set, go and do some little bits of a set or something, then sure. But the majority of our clients are giving us 2-3 tops. You've got a very chilled client if they're giving you 4 hours a week, right? So that's almost the upper limit of what you'll get from someone if they're a general population client. And in which case we're looking at how can we as efficiently as possible use that time. Do we have time to be alternating back and forth between arms? Or I've also thought another reason to do unilateral exercises if you were pulling might be inertial forces. Inertial effects, because sometimes you've got a pulley on top of a stack, and if you use one arm at a time, you've got reduced inertial effects on the shoulder. So that might offset some of the instability.
There's so many
factors. But the key thing is efficiency and appropriateness.
I don't think trainers get that they have. This is a statistic. I used to say 3/165, but they have. If your client's coming to you 3 hours a week, you have 1.8% of their time. And that's when we use this tool called exercise to get the most out of it. You have 3,600 seconds. And that even brought to my mind something that I don't know if it's died down, but I mean, you might have seen, I'm sure you have, when they started saying 3 minutes to rest for optimal hypertrophy going.
Yeah, I mean, didn't want to bring that, but yeah, we could bring that.
I mean, no, I'm just bringing it up.
I discussed about that on my last podcast about the fact that if you're limited in time, you cannot rest 5+ minutes.
Yeah.
I started working my sets down to, from 2 minutes in the old days to 90 seconds to 60, and I even tried 30, and I get to mess with all of those. So when this came out, I said, all right, I'm going to try this because I can go at 2 a.m. and not worry about the time. And I sat there like I should read a novel between sets and maybe binge a couple shows because I couldn't do it. It just seemed like an incredible, and I get it for extreme sets. Powerlifters, we rested 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes days. Days between a max triple set or something. But sure, again, back to the Mr. Olympia when Terrence goes to Joe.
Yeah.
It's not about efficiency. It's about getting whatever works the most. And maybe that is something to consider. But when you have an hour.
It's such a tiny subset of the population, right?
And so the other question around unilateral exercises, what are your thoughts about pull around and press around exercise? Because they're like unilateral exercise, and you made a reel about that.
Rebranded them as reach arounds.
Yeah.
So, I think you got slammed because you didn't name them.
Yeah, the famous blah 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 pull arounds.
Yeah, which is an exercise that I remember talking about, and it's brought up at RTS quite a bit. It just wasn't labeled as anything more than here's another. If you go back, if you remember the thing we taught, the exercise equation, that had joint positions and motions and resistance and intention. It's another joint position and different motion. It's a slightly different range. It was taught as nothing more than glorified. Then suddenly it became everybody's favorite because
of social media.
And because previously it was discussed as being a variation and a means of achieving a slightly different stimulus through a different range. And there were no promises made about the adaptations that you would see to it because
there can't be.
A professional couldn't make any promises about adaptations that you would see from a certain exercise. But recently, that's been the case. Someone has made almost claims, effectively, about what you would expect to see from training in this way and how it might be superior. And as a result, people have tried it. And maybe they've experienced different sensations as a result of doing it. but there are also considerations that haven't been kept in mind, which is primarily why I made that reel as well.
Yeah.
Similar to the unilateral exercise one, right? Is all we're ever trying to do is float the things that people should consider.
He wasn't dismissing it. We weren't dismissing it. We were simply saying, here's some other things that you need to think about. And
you bring new things to think about, but people don't want to do that. They don't want to.
No, and
I mean that's a fact. If they're on social media following, XYZ account, they don't want to think more than that because they want something efficient. But maybe that's not that efficient.
But if you see it on social media and you see
it easy.
If you see it on social media by a well-known influencer or person, whatever you want to call them, then you want to be the person in the gym having people see you do the new thing that everyone's doing. Face pulls were a great example.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I went into a gym, seeing people pull, I'd never seen it before. And so suddenly, it took about 3 months, and then it spread. As I was traveling globally, I was seeing it everywhere. But these things existed. And in fact, with the angle that started with this whole angle of a pull down as being so unique. And in my slides, I put distinctly there were machines created 15, 20 years ago that all did that. And they were not labeled as anything other than, here's something you may not have thought about an angle, and here's something to try. And that's the way I wish people would look at these things and go, I do. I don't know if you have. I'm sure you have. You look at somebody's post and you go, wow, I never thought. Aldo.
Yeah.
I never, the glute hypertrophy coach.
Yeah.
Just wildly great, bizarre guy that just comes up with some incredibly unique things.
Which one?
Iron University.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Sorry, by his
name.
name.
because there was
But
two.
You see things.
Yeah.
You see things, and you go, I never would have thought about doing it that way. And you go, wow, that's interesting. But he'll also, again, we'll all claim that, all right, this is just a variation of that exercise equation. And if trainers would learn that, they could name dozens of exercises that no one's ever come up with before. Not saying they'll all be appropriate.
Okay, so I think you answered to all the questions. I just wanted to go back to one thing not to conclude, but to touch on fluoroscopy. And because we were talking about static assessment that we cannot base on judgment on that, and could you explain to the people what is fluoroscopy and how did you apply that to?
I hate to say it this way. COVID was an incredible time. I happened to be living with Tom at the time. I'd come back from China. Luckily, it's a long story, but during that time frame, because of his connections and his reputation and his desire to see, as RTS, one of the mantras principles is the inside view of the body. Well, we can take an MRI, which helps us see some things, but an X-ray is a static picture, as you know, from the bones you see inside. Fluoroscopy is basically moving X-ray. It was in I can't remember the Arnold movie where he was running through Running Man. When he was there was kind of this early version of fluoroscopy. So Tom thought about fluoroscopy as a way to look at. He wanted to see. It was really about the scapula. Although it turned out to be everything. So he contacted an orthopedic surgeon who was really excited about this idea. For anybody that's ever had this done as a medical procedure, it's like $5,000 for a 10-minute little picture movie of your knee or something. But we had access. We did 2 separate 3 to 4 hour sessions on it. So we had about total 6 to 8 hours, and we still have, I think, future access. So we went in there, and there was groups of 5 or 6 of us, Tom, myself, and some other people that we work with. And we found out that we could look at the scapula and the spine and the knee and the ankle and all this stuff and see things that, I don't know how to say this, that Tom would say, I was wrong about this. His view of the scapula in terms of its movement and the way he used to draw it and the way we envisioned it was nowhere near what we saw on, by the way, it was a limited number of people, so I don't know how to interpret that, except nobody's scapula moved the way we thought it did. It moves very little, but at the same time, when one of the things we did is when we were both, and I spent 30 years trying to keep my scapula retracted on a chest press, thinking that it's rock solid smooth, and so Tom, of course, and Tony, and everybody's scapula, no matter what you think, there's movement. So it really opened up some really interesting things about the scapula, about the spine, this whole fear of doing a crunch, a normal crunch as being, bad for lumbar flexion. Well, what we found out that there appears to be limited amount of lumbar movement in a normal crunch. You get more lumbar movement in a reverse crunch based on what we saw in fluoroscopy. But it was just really interesting stuff.
And so there was also a difference between people bones shape, right?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, and so that's why maybe when you, I don't know, do a left, I mean, not, let's say tricep extension for some people, it's like that, and some other like that. Like, so yeah, that's why also static assessment may be like biased, because you don't see that. And that's why movement, you see, yeah, and you discovered things with that.
I can't, I'm, when someday when you have, if you have children soon, I always, when I see a little child, my first thought is, I wonder what the world's going to be like when they're my age, when I'm, long gone. But maybe by then, we'll be able to go into a room like this, and you'll be able to do an exercise with fluoroscopy. You can watch some joint stuff going on, and you can see their particular joints, and we'll be able to measure. We'll be able to put a little thing in here and say 9, 10. Oh, you're done. Here, and then it tells you when you're ready for your next set. But for now, it's all educated speculation on the hard part of a trainer. But the fluoroscopy was definitely an eye-opener.
And so is it available on exerciseprofessional.com?
Has he put that up there yet? I don't know that we have so much. Exerciseprofessional.com is actually a 2-part site where there's hosts the advanced
and
education. And then there's a subscription side that has that, and I think some of it's up. I don't, embarrassingly to say, I haven't even looked at the subscription side that much.
So to find out, just subscribe to Exerciseprofessional.com.
It will be eventually, because it was really, but I know that we want to get back and do it again, hopefully when we're all in the country together. But there's still more things we want to see and get better views of, because it really, he's one of the few people, and I think we all have embraced this, that when we're wrong, or we're not as accurate as we could have been. We have no problem saying, wow, this is the way it really is compared to what we thought, and this is pretty good proof. But it also helped us because there was a lot of controversy on scapula stuff relative to movement, and the people that were suddenly attempting to differ themselves from what we were teaching, were saying things that were just inaccurate, and the fluoroscopy seemed to really strongly support that.
Okay, thank you so much to both of you. Last question to conclude. According to you, Dr. Mark Slavin, and you, Benny Price, what's a good trainer?
You get to go first on that. I'm going to...
What's a good, coach or trainer to you?
It varies slightly, I think, depending on the person that's employing them. Because in the very early stages, you just need someone with a plan that isn't bad and that will keep you accountable and that makes you like going to the gym, and that you want to work for as well, right? That you want to put in effort to appease. And a lot of the time that's going to achieve most people more goals than someone who's really clever and knows lots of things, but is a bit of a dick. And no one likes spending 3 hours a week with them, and they don't feel like they want to put in effort to make this person proud. Like, that's, from a coaching point of view, I think that's, and we've seen that, right? You ask any trainer, like, what gets people results? It's adherence and effort. So good people get adherence and effort out of other people, and particularly like empathetic and compassionate people get that out of them, because they know how to build something, not that they like, but that person will like and stick with and stay with. So I think from a coaching point of view, if that's the biggest thing, is really understanding the other person and what's going to keep them on this journey for as long as possible. I think it's a little bit different from what makes a good personal trainer, which to us is someone who is on the gym floor with an individual and is improving, optimizing, and appropriately providing and executing the training with someone. And to be that person, you need to be attentive. You need to be watching, you need to be looking, but then you also need to know what you're looking for. And the reason why we teach mechanics is we think that's the one thing you need to be looking for. So I would separate the two a little bit, but to us, what we try and do is we teach people how to be great personal trainers and handle the exercise side of things with people, and the side of actually coaching people is that's not an exercise thing, right? That's a people thing, and I'm not great with people, so I'm not exactly the one to teach people how to do that. But certainly the watching the mechanics of how stuff's moving and making sure that we're making it as efficient, right? Because that's value. Yeah. The more efficient time with someone is, the more valuable it gets. That's how I'd generally grade those two things.
That's a 35-year thought question. I still don't have an answer. I used to think my mistake early on was it was all knowledge. And I was corrected by a very good friend of mine early on by saying, and she was 100% right, that the knowledge is the easy part. It really is. I believe I can teach this stuff to anybody provided they want it. They want to learn. Because when you said it's not just about what to look for, it's wanting to look for it as well. You have to want to. You really have to care about it. And I think that our person, whatever the personality is of that person, people person, not people person, I think when the client senses that they don't, here's the weird thing about training that nobody ever thinks about. I believe, and I'm sure there's others, I believe it's the one profession that one of the few, if only professions I can think of where your customer has no idea if you're good or bad. And what I mean by that is if I am a hairstylist and the first time he comes to me and I do something, he'll know good or bad right away. Massage therapist, person that cleans your house, chef that cooks your meal,
Run a hotel, if you do anything.
Yeah, anything. But your customers, your clients, don't know where their shoulders go. They don't know what angle. They don't know what muscles are involved. They may want to care. But the word is they have a rapport with you. They trust that you do. And when you show that meticulous attention to detail without overkill, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah, it's in line with the micro observation does not mean micromanagement.
Yeah. But it goes to this, if you're not passionate about continuously improving yourself and continuously learning. I mean, I've been at it for 35 years, and I look at my slides before every course, and we talk about it almost on at least 2 or 3 times a week is, all right, how can we make this better? How can we get this point across better?
Which means I'm quite often presenting slides that are different from the last time I presented them.
Yeah.
Which is quite difficult. Yeah.
And I keep forgetting, but it's just this constant learning thing. I just think you have to be passionate about what goes into it. And I think the profession started with, and I certainly would be guilty when I got into it, as, I get to work in a place that I love to play at too, and I get to make a living at it. But it's a serious, you're applying force to people's bodies. You're altering their lives. You're dealing with their long-term things.
Do you think part of that is that the whole premise of someone taking on a coach trainer is they're looking for self-improvement. They're looking to be better. And the more that you embody that yourself, it's almost infectious. And that people...
Yeah, exactly. And one of the best... you brought to my mind this one trainer that I used to love to watch. And I would watch this lady train her clients, and I couldn't figure out who was getting the better out of the workout because she was so into squeezing everything out of that client. I mean, when they were down on the floor, she was down on the floor, and I think she sweat more than they did, but she wanted it for them as much. And it becomes infectious. I really do. And the last thing I'll say, I just saw something on social media redeeming thing. I thought it was interesting. I'm not sure it applies, but I have to say it. It was a guy that said one of the worst disease we have now today, I'm paraphrasing what he said, is trying to be better than everyone else. I think you should just try to be better, a better version of you tomorrow. And the trainer, I think social media has corrupted this to be better than someone else when a good trainer just keeps wanting to be better at what they do. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, that answered. So thank you so much. Merci beaucoup à tous d'avoir regardé le podcast. Si vous avez aimé, évidemment, abonnez-vous à RTS Global, Dr Mark Slavin, Benny Price. Je mettrai tous les liens dans la description. Et on se retrouve très vite. Abonnez-vous, partagez. Et merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.
Wow.
Merci beaucoup.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.